The air inside the Galactic Council chamber felt heavier than usual, not because of gravity but because of what was about to happen. Everyone knew it. You could see it in the way the Varelian delegates kept their long silver eyes lowered, how the Qatari diplomats shifted their feathered shoulders ever so slightly, and how the human delegation sat perfectly still, like they were holding their breath. Earth had been part of the Council for just over 40 years. Not long by galactic standards. Some species had been members for centuries, but long enough to matter. Humans had brought something new to the table. Messy, emotional, sometimes chaotic ideas about fairness, individual choice, and second chances. They weren't the strongest, fastest, or oldest species in the room, but they were stubborn and passionate, and that had earned them both respect and suspicion. Now, that fragile trust was about to snap. The vote had just been called on Resolution 734B, a sweeping set of rules that would limit how many people any one planet could have, and place all artificial intelligence under direct council oversight. On paper, it sounded reasonable. For the stability of the galaxy, the Varelians had said. To prevent runaway technological risks, added the Qatari. But to the humans, it felt like a cage being built around their future. Back on Earth, things were finally starting to heal. After decades of climate disasters, resource wars, and political fractures, the planet had begun stitching itself back together. Cities were greener, oceans cleaner, and for the first time in generations, children grew up without hearing air raid sirens. But that progress came with scars and with hard-won lessons. The last thing Earth needed was an outside power, telling them how many children they could have or what kind of machines they could build. When the council speaker announced the resolution had passed, by a narrow margin, but passed nonetheless, the human lead delegate didn't argue, didn't shout, didn't even stand up right away. They just sat there for a long moment, hands resting on the smooth, cool surface of the table, staring at the holographic seal of the council floating above it. Then, slowly they rose. Every eye in the chamber turned toward them. Cameras from a dozen species zoomed in. Even the usually unreadable Varelians leaned forward slightly. We came here believing we were joining a union of equals, the delegate said, voice calm but carrying through the silent room like a stone dropped in still water. We shared our science, our art, our stories. We listened. We compromised. But this, they gestured toward the glowing resolution text hovering in the air. This isn't partnership. This is control dressed up as care. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Some species looked uncomfortable. Others looked annoyed. One young mere diplomat actually hissed, a sign of deep disapproval in their culture. The human didn't flinch. Earth will not sign away its right to choose its own path. Not today. Not ever. And with that, they turned and walked out. Not dramatically, not with the slam of the door. Just walked, one foot in front of the other, down the long corridor of polished obsidian and starlight glass, past murals showing centuries of galactic unity, past security drones that didn't move to stop them, past the quiet stares of aides and translators who knew they were witnessing history. Behind them, the chamber remained frozen for nearly a full minute. No one spoke. No one moved. It was as if the entire room was holding its breath, waiting for someone to say, "Wait, let's talk about this." But no one did. Outside the station, Earth's shuttle waited, engines humming softly. As the delegate stepped aboard, the pilot, a quiet woman who'd flown supply runs between Mars and Titan for 20 years, just nodded. No questions. She already knew. Heading home? She asked. Yeah, the delegate said, buckling in. All the way. The shuttle lifted off smoothly, peeling away from Harmony Prime, the massive orbital hub where the council met. Through the viewport, the delegate watched the station shrink, a glittering jewel against the black, full of beings who thought they understood humanity. But they didn't, not really. They saw humans as loud, impulsive, emotional. They didn't see the quiet strength it took to rebuild a broken world. They didn't understand that sometimes saying no is the most human thing you can do. Back on Earth, news of the walkout spread faster than a solar flare. At first there was panic. Markets dipped. Some feared war. Others feared isolation. But then something unexpected happened. People started talking, not just politicians, but teachers, farmers, engineers, kids in classrooms from Jakarta to Buenos Aires. They asked, what does it mean to be free? And more importantly, Are we willing to protect that freedom even if it means standing alone? In town halls and online forums, in community centers and late-night kitchen conversations, a new kind of unity began to form. Not the forced unity of old governments, but something deeper, shared purpose. Earth had spent so long looking outward, trying to prove itself to the stars, that it had almost forgotten to listen to its own heartbeat. Now, that heartbeat was getting louder. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the Council scrambled. Some called for sanctions. Others whispered about containing the human problem. But most just felt unsettled, because for the first time in decades, the humans, the ones who always showed up with wild ideas, strange music, and that baffling habit of hugging when they met, were gone. And the silence they left behind was louder than any argument. No one knew it yet, but that single act, walking out of a room, would ripple through the galaxy in ways no one could predict. It wouldn't start a war. It wouldn't collapse civilizations. But it would change everything. Because the day humans left the Galactic Council wasn't the end of their story. It was the moment the universe realized it had been taking them for granted all along. And Earth? Earth was just getting started. For 3 whole years, Earth said nothing. No messages, no broadcasts, no trade ships leaving orbit. From the outside, it looked like the planet had vanished, like someone had flipped a switch and turned off the lights. The Galactic Council kept scanning the Sol system, expecting chaos, riots, blackouts, maybe even civil war. After all, humans were known for their drama. But instead they found quiet, not the quiet of collapse, not the silence of fear, but the kind of quiet that comes when people are busy doing something important. Back on Earth, life didn't stop. It changed. The moment the delegation walked out of the council chamber, governments that had spent decades arguing over borders, resources, and old grudges did something no one thought possible. They started listening to each other. Not perfectly, not without fights, but they tried, because for the first time, they weren't performing for an audience of aliens. They were doing it for themselves. The big orbital shipyards that once built sleek diplomatic cruisers and cargo haulers for interstellar trade, shut down, not destroyed, just powered off. The metal skeletons of half-finished ships hung in orbit like ghosts, slowly being stripped for parts. Those parts didn't go to war machines or secret weapons. They went to repair aging water purifiers in drought-stricken regions, to reinforce seawalls in sinking coastal cities, to build solar farms in places that used to burn coal just to keep the lights on, factories that once made luxury goods for off-world buyers, jewelry woven from asteroid silk, music boxes that played songs in alien scales, switched to making things Earth actually needed, medical supplies, school tablets, seeds for drought-resistant crops. It wasn't glamorous. No one was posting about it on galactic social feeds. But it mattered, and the people? They adapted. Fast kids who used to dream of becoming star pilots now signed up for soil science or urban farming. Retired engineers came out of quiet retirement to help redesign old power grids. Artists painted murals not about distant galaxies, but about rivers returning to life, forests regrowing, neighbors sharing tools. There was a strange kind of pride in it. Not the loud, boastful kind, but the quiet kind that comes from knowing you're part of something real. Of course, it wasn't all smooth. There were shortages. There were days when the news felt heavy. Some people missed the old days. The easy money from alien trade, the thrill of seeing Earth's name on galactic news channels. But even they couldn't deny the change in the air. The air itself felt cleaner. Cities felt calmer. People looked each other in the eye more. Meanwhile, out in the galaxy, rumors ran wild. "They're building a secret fleet," whispered one trader near the Orion Spur. "No, they've gone back to tribal living," argued another near Alpha Centauri. "They're developing forbidden AI, something that can rewrite reality," claimed a paranoid, mere analyst on a fringe data channel. None of it was true, but the silence made room for stories. And fear loves a vacuum. The council, for its part, tried to act like nothing had changed. They passed new regulations, held summits, even launched a Galactic Unity Festival to show how strong they were without Earth. But something was off. Human mediators had always been the ones who could sit with two warring species for hours listening, not just to their demands, but to the hurt underneath. Without them, small disagreements turned into standoffs. Without human engineers who'd always been willing to tinker with broken tech just for the fun of it, Some colonies struggled to keep their life support systems running. And then there was the culture gap. Humans had been the galaxy's biggest fans. They bought alien poetry books, learned obscure musical instruments just to play songs from distant worlds, hosted festivals celebrating off-world art. Now those artists had no audience. A Qatari flute maker shut down their studio. A Varelian hologram poet stopped creating, not because they lost money, but because it felt pointless to make beauty no one would see. Back on Earth, though, beauty was everywhere. Not the flashy kind, the everyday kind. A community garden blooming where a parking lot used to be. A classroom full of kids laughing over a science experiment that actually worked. An old couple dancing in their kitchen to a song they'd written themselves. People started calling it the Great Turn Inward. Not as a criticism, but as a description. Like watching a plant that had been stretching toward the sun suddenly focus all its energy on growing deeper roots. And those roots were strong. One day, a group of teenagers in what used to be called Southeast Asia launched a homemade satellite, not to spy or broadcast, but to monitor coral reef recovery. It was built from recycled parts powered by a tiny solar panel and cost less than a pair of old-style hover boots. When it sent back its first clear image of baby coral growing on a once-dead reef, the whole village threw a party. No one outside Earth knew, and that was okay. That was the point. Earth wasn't hiding. It wasn't angry. It was just choosing itself. Choosing to believe that healing didn't need an audience, that progress didn't need approval from a council full of beings who'd never felt rain on their skin or tasted food grown in their own soil. And slowly, quietly, the planet began to breathe again, not the shallow, anxious breath of a species trying to prove it belonged among the stars, but the deep, steady breath of one that finally remembered it already had everything it needed right here. Out in the galaxy, the silence from Earth kept growing. But on Earth, the silence was full of life, of hammers on wood, of seeds cracking open in soil, of voices planning, building, dreaming. No one was watching. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like a gift. At first, the galaxy didn't notice Earth was gone. Not really. Life went on. Ships flew. Markets traded. Council meetings droned on like always. But then, little by little, things started to slip. It began with the small stuff. The kind of things no one thinks about until they're missing. Like the terraforming microbes. Humans had shared them freely for years. Tiny engineered organisms that could turn dry, dead rock into fertile soil in just a few seasons. They'd helped a dozen young colonies survive on harsh worlds. Now those microbes stopped coming. No warning. No explanation. Just nothing. Colonies that had come to rely on regular shipments suddenly found their crops failing, their air thinning, their children coughing in the dust. They sent urgent requests to the council, but the council had no answer. Earth wasn't responding, and no one else knew how to make the microbes work quite like humans did. Then came the silence in diplomacy. There'd been a border dispute brewing between two species, the Zenth and the Mir, over a mineral-rich moon. Normally it would have been tense but manageable. But this time, there was no human mediator to sit with both sides, to listen not just to their demands, but to the fear underneath. Humans had a strange gift for that, making enemies feel heard without taking sides. Without them, words turned sharp. Accusations flew. A patrol ship got too close. A warning shot was fired. And just like that, what could have been settled over tea and translated poetry turned into a full-blown skirmish. Ships were damaged. Lives were lost. And for the first time in decades, real war threatened to spread. The council scrambled. They sent their best diplomats, their oldest elders, their most logical thinkers. But logic couldn't soothe wounded pride. Ancient protocols couldn't heal fresh grief. And no one knew how to say, "I understand why you're angry," in a way that actually made the other side feel seen. Meanwhile, the economy started to crack. Humans had been the galaxy's biggest customers for art. Music, philosophy, things that didn't power ships or feed armies, but fed the soul. They bought Qatari dream songs by the thousands, hung Varelian light weavings in their homes, collected poetry from species no one else had even heard of. When Earth went quiet, those markets collapsed overnight. Artists who'd made a living sharing their culture suddenly had no one to share it with. Studios closed. Musicians put down their instruments. A whole layer of galactic life, the soft, beautiful, unnecessary layer, began to fade. Some called it the Great Quietening. Others just felt a strange emptiness, like a song had stopped playing in the background of the universe, and no one knew how to start it again. Even the council itself began to change. Without humans pushing for flexibility, for second chances, for messy but honest compromise, the old powers tightened their grip. Rules got stricter. Dissent was labeled instability. Younger species were told to wait their turn, even as their world struggled. The council started using Earth as a warning. See what happens when you put emotion over order, when you value freedom over unity? But the warning rang hollow, because deep down everyone knew the galaxy hadn't gotten safer without humans. It had gotten colder. Back on Earth, none of this was visible. No one was watching the news feeds from the outer rim. No one knew about the failing colonies or the rising tensions. They were too busy rebuilding their own world, planting trees, fixing schools, teaching kids how to grow food and think for themselves. They weren't ignoring the galaxy out of spite. They just had work to do, real grounded human work, but the ripple was real. On a dusty mining outpost near the Helix Nebula, a young worker stared at a broken water recycler. It had been built using human-designed parts, and now it was failing. No one on the station knew how to fix it. The manual was an Earth standard, and the last human technician had left 2 years ago. The worker tried to jury-rig a solution, but it only made things worse. That night, as they rationed their last clean water, they whispered something no one in the galaxy had said in a long time. I miss them. Not I miss their tech. Not I miss their trade. Just them. That feeling spread. A Qatari poet whose work used to sell out in human cities stopped writing. What's the point, they told a friend, if no one will feel it in their bones? A Varelian engineer, reviewing old joint projects with Earth, realized how much they'd learned from human improvisation. The way they'd patch a broken system with duct tape and hope, then somehow make it better than before. Even the Council's own archives began filling with quiet notes. Human Approach recommended, see Earth Protocol for Conflict Resolution. Unresolved would have consulted Terran Liaison, but there was no one to consult. And the longer Earth stayed silent, the more the galaxy realized something uncomfortable. They hadn't just lost a member. They'd lost a mirror. Humans had reflected back the best and worst of everyone, sometimes painfully, sometimes beautifully, but always honestly. Without that reflection, the galaxy started to forget what it was supposed to be. Not just efficient, not just orderly, but alive. One evening, on a quiet moon colony that used to trade spices with Earth, a group of kids gathered around an old data pad. On it was a human folk song, simple, raw, full of longing and hope. They'd found it in an archive labeled Cultural Artifact, Pre-Withdrawal. They played it over and over, not understanding all the words, but feeling something stir inside them. One of them said, "Why did they leave?" Another shrugged. "Maybe we weren't worth staying for." But that wasn't it. Not at all. Earth hadn't left because the galaxy was unworthy. They'd left because they finally understood their worth and refused to trade it for a seat at a table that demanded they shrink themselves to fit. The galaxy didn't see that yet. All they felt was the absence. The silence where laughter used to be. The gap where compassion used to step in. The coldness where warmth used to live. And slowly, painfully, the universe began to understand. You don't know what you've got until it's gone. But Earth wasn't gone. Not really. They were just waiting, quietly, patiently, for the galaxy to grow up enough to realize that true unity isn't about control. It's about trust, and respect, and the courage to let others choose their own path. Until then, they'd keep tending their gardens, teaching their children, and living their truth, whether anyone was watching or not. It started with a signal, weak, broken, barely more than static. Not from Earth, not from any council world, just a faint cry for help drifting out of the dark, near the edge of known space. A Qatari science vessel, the Whisper of Dawn, had strayed too close to a dying star while studying solar flares. Something went wrong. Navigation failed, engines sputtered, and now the ship was caught in the star's pull, spiraling toward a black hole that waited like a silent predator in the void. The crew sent out a distress call, but no one answered. Council ships nearby cited protocol violations. The Whisper had entered a restricted observation zone without clearance. Helping them would set a bad precedent, they said. Better to let the rules hold, so they watched. And waited. And did nothing. But someone else heard the call. Out past the asteroid belt of a quiet system. A human freighter was making its slow way home after a routine supply run, carrying seeds, medical kits, and a crate of hand-carved wooden toys meant for a village school. The ship wasn't armed. It wasn't fast. It was just a beat-up old hauler with patched hull plates and a crew who'd rather fix a broken engine than fire a weapon. When the distress signal crackled over their comms, they didn't hesitate. "Change course," the captain said. "Full power to thrusters. But that's deep rim territory," someone pointed out. "No support. No backup." "We're not going for backup," the captain replied. "We're going because they're out there alone and they need help. No debate. No committee vote. Just a simple human choice. When someone's drowning, you throw a rope even if you don't know their name." The freighter pushed hard, burning fuel it couldn't easily replace, racing against gravity and time. When it finally reached the whisper of dawn, the Qatari ship was already tilting, its hull groaning under stress. The human crew didn't wait for permission. They launched rescue pods, linked tethers, and used their own ship's thrusters to pull the Qatari vessel free. Just as the black hole's grip began to tighten, it wasn't pretty. It wasn't heroic in the grand cinematic way. Wires sparked. Alarms blared. One crew member got a nasty burn from a ruptured coolant line, but they got the job done. When the Qatari scientists stepped onto the human ship, they were stunned. Not just by the rescue, but by the kindness. No demands. No lectures. Just warm blankets, clean water, and a quiet, "You're safe now." Later, back at a neutral station, one of the rescued Qatari, a scientist who'd spent their life studying cosmic patterns, spoke to a small gathering. Their voice trembled, not from fear, but from something deeper. "They didn't know us," they said. "They owed us nothing. The council had abandoned us for breaking a rule. But these humans, they saw only that we were alive, and that was enough." The word spread. Fast. Not through official channels, not through press releases, but through whispers in docking bays, late-night chats in mess halls, messages passed between friends across star systems. People began to talk, not about Earth's silence, but about what that silence had hidden. Not anger, not pride, but a quiet kind of decency that hadn't gone away at all. Protests started small. A group of students on a Varelian moon held up signs that read, "Would you have saved them?" A mere trade guild refused to ship goods until the council issued an apology. Even some council members, older ones who remembered what it was like before Earth joined, began speaking out. "We made a mistake," one admitted in a closed session. "We confused order with morality." But Earth didn't respond to the sudden wave of attention. No triumphant return. No, "we told you so." They just went back to their work, planting, building, healing. The freighter crew returned to their route, delivering seeds and school books like nothing had happened. To them, it wasn't a political act. It was just what you do. That's what confused the galaxy the most. Humans weren't using the rescue as leverage. They weren't demanding a seat back at the table. They weren't even asking to be thanked. And that made their actions even more powerful, because it meant their kindness wasn't a strategy. It was who they were. On Earth, people watched the news from the outer rim with quiet interest, but no surprise. Of course they'd helped. Of course they would. That wasn't the hard part. The hard part had been walking away in the first place, choosing to protect their own people, their own values, even when it meant being called selfish or reckless. Now, the galaxy was starting to see the truth. Earth hadn't left because they didn't care. They'd left because they cared too much, to let others define their worth. Back on the council station, tensions rose. Younger species demanded change. If humans can act with honor without rules, one delegate argued, maybe the rules are the problem. The old guard resisted, clinging to control like a life raft. But the tide was turning, and Earth stayed quiet, not out of stubbornness, not out of spite, but because they'd learned something important during their years of silence. You don't need the world's approval to do what's right. You just need to know, deep in your bones, that you're doing it for the right reasons. The rescue of the Whisper of Dawn didn't bring Earth back into the fold. But it cracked the door open, not with force, not with demands, but with a simple, undeniable truth: humanity hadn't disappeared. They just stopped performing. And in that quiet act of saving strangers in the dark, they reminded the galaxy of something it had almost forgotten, that the strongest civilizations aren't built on power or rules, but on the choice to help someone even when no one's watching, especially when no one's watching. That choice echoed louder than any speech, any treaty, any resolution ever could, and for the first time in years the universe began to hope, not that Earth would return, but that maybe, just maybe, the rest of them could learn to be a little more human. 5 years after the walkout, the Galactic Council didn't fall with explosions or declarations of war. It just faded, like an old photograph left too long in the sun, colors bleaching, edges curling, until one day no one remembered why they'd kept it on the wall. The truth was, it had stopped working long before that. Too many rules, too much fear of change, too little trust. And without Earth in the room, not as a leader, not as a rebel, but as a reminder that cooperation should feel human, the whole system grew stiff, cold and brittle. In its place, something new began to grow, not from the top down, but from the ground up. Small groups of species, some old, some young, started meeting on neutral moons, quiet asteroids, even old derelict stations. No grand titles, no binding votes, just conversations. What if we helped each other without needing permission? Someone asked. What if we shared what we have, not because a rule says so, but because it's the right thing? Another added. They called it the concord of equals. Not because everyone was the same, but because everyone mattered, and the funny thing? Much of it was inspired by Earth. Not by Earth's technology or ships or weapons, but by the way humans had lived after they left. The way they'd chosen community over control. The way they'd helped strangers without asking for anything back. The way they'd shown that strength isn't about power. It's about staying true to your values even when it's hard. Earth never joined the conquered. Not officially. They didn't need to. They'd already shown what was possible. Instead, they did something quieter, and in its own way more powerful. Near the moon, in a patch of calm space that had once been used for satellite repairs, Earth opened a single unguarded zone. No checkpoints, no permits, no questions asked. Just a simple ring of solar-powered beacons and a message broadcast in dozens of languages. All are welcome. Come in peace. At first, no one came. The galaxy was still nervous. Old habits die hard. But then, a Qatari artist arrived carrying a sculpture made of recycled starlight glass. They left it floating gently in the zone with a note, for the ones who remember kindness. A week later, a young Mir engineer showed up with a broken music box. They didn't speak Earth standard, but they pointed to the device, then to their heart. A human technician, just a regular person who happened to be passing by, smiled, took the box, fixed the spring, and handed it back. The Mir bowed deeply. No words needed, slowly more came. Traders brought seeds from alien worlds. Teachers shared stories. Musicians played songs under the silent watch of Earth's blue glow. No deals were signed. No treaties made. Just people, of all shapes, sizes, and species, meeting as equals. Not because a council said they should, but because they wanted to. And Earth? Earth just watched, listened, offered tea if someone looked tired, shared a blanket if it was cold, never pushed, never preached, just was. That's when the universe finally understood. The day humans left the Galactic Council wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of something better, because Earth hadn't walked away to punish the galaxy. They'd walked away to protect something precious. Their right to choose, to grow, to make mistakes and learn from them without someone else holding a rule book over their head. And in doing so, they'd given the rest of the galaxy permission to do the same. The old council had believed unity meant sameness, that everyone had to follow the same path, obey the same rules, speak the same way. But Earth had shown a different truth. Real unity comes from respect, not control. From trust, not fear. From the courage to let others be themselves, even if it's messy. Back on Earth, life kept moving forward. Cities hummed with quiet energy. Children learned not just how to read and count, but how to listen, how to care, how to fix what's broken without waiting for someone in charge to tell them to. The planet wasn't perfect. There were still hard days, tough choices, moments of doubt. But there was also something deeper now. A sense of belonging that didn't depend on outside approval. And out in space, the change kept spreading. New colonies started using Earth's old sovereignty compact as a model, Not to copy it, but to spark their own ideas. A group of asteroid miners formed a self-governing alliance based on mutual aid, not profit. A school on a distant moon taught its students both math and empathy, saying, "You need both to build a world worth living in." No one called it the human way. They didn't need to. The idea had taken root on its own. Years later, when historians, human and otherwise, looked back, they wouldn't point to a battle or a treaty as the turning point. They'd point to a quiet moment, a human freighter turning toward a dying ship in the dark, or a single delegate walking out of a room full of power, choosing principle over position, or a simple zone near the moon where strangers became friends over shared silence. The universe didn't change overnight, but it changed, and it changed because one species dared to say, "We won't trade our soul for a seat at your table. We'll build our own." Earth never asked to be a hero. They just refused to be small, and in that refusal they gave the galaxy something it didn't even know it was missing: hope that freedom and kindness could go hand in hand. That you could stand alone without being lonely. That walking away from something broken wasn't weakness, it was the first step toward building something true. So, the day humans left the Galactic Council wasn't the day the universe ended, it was the day the universe remembered what it meant to be alive.